We will now go straight into our next paper. Yonten Chophel, if you could, is Yonten Chophel? I can see Dr. Sonam Vanchu. Yes, all right. Yonten, please go ahead. Yes.
Kuzusampo, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all the attendees near and far. Before I switch on to my presentation, I would like to acknowledge organizer for providing such a wonderful platform to discuss. In fact, arguably, I would argue that the most important challenges that we face in the 21st century, that is climate change. So as you could see in the screen, my presentation will be on the prevention and mitigation of climate change, lessons from Bhutan. Before I really go on with my presentation, let me preface my talk with declaring that I'm not a professional, nor I am, I'm a climate. I'm not a professional who works on, professional who works on climate change. Neither am I a conservationist, and I don't have any vested interest. So the reason why I decided to talk on this one is this topic is because if you look at the clause 1 of Article 5 of Constitution of Kingdom of Bhutan, it talks about our fundamental duty. It is our fundamental duty to, talk, to contribute something in turn which conserves our environment and, strengthen our rich biodiversity, which we are in fact proud of. Outline of a presentation, I'll be briefly talking about global warming and climate change, and then what's Bhutan's status, and then the attributes of Bhutanese success story, then what will happen in the face of climate change in changing times, and then I'll be also discussing about the challenges and then the way forward. So when it comes to global warming and climate change, is it really real? There is a debate. I've written a review paper on this one. That there's two schools of thought in here when it comes to whether the global warming and climate change is really happening or not. Where one school of thought believes that it is happening and we must do something about it, whereas other school of thought believes that climate is changing and it has been changing for long, and then it is not really an anthropogenic cause, or we say that it is not caused by the emission of carbons and all. But in my study that I did, found out that if you go deeper and analyze on all those thoughts, then there's a research paper been done by Liu et al. In 2019, where he found out that there are two kind of school of thought with regard to the climate change and the concern that they have. This is done in China, where in the provinces with the high carbon dependency, which means where there's a lot of factories and all, then those people are less concerned, whereas people who are not emitting much are a bit concerned. So which means if you look at we could see that the motive behind it seems like it is something to do with the economic and the profit-oriented paradigm of thinking, rather than discussing about the fact of whether the global warming is happening or not. So in my paper, I have discussed and I saw that in evidences, if you look at the evidences of global warming and climate change, the first evidences we can get is from the surface temperature. Is it rising? Yes, definitely it is rising. You can, I can share this paper later, or maybe, organizer can share the link of it. Uh, there it is found that the surface temperature is increasing over the years. And even the sea surface temperature is increasing over the years. And borehole temperature is also increasing. And then sea level is also increasing. So if you look at all the evidences, then there is certainly an increase in the temperature, which means the global warming is really happening and it is real. So therefore, I think the biggest challenge that we face, like I've said before, is the global warming and the climate change. So now what about Bhutan? Are we affected? Uh, through document analysis, I found out that, Bhutan's 24 weather stations shows the rise in the temperature about 1 degree Celsius in summer and 2 degrees Celsius in winter. So it's since from the year 2000, this reported in ICMOD paper report in 2016. So we could clearly see that despite our excellent management of the environment and the carbon sink, then since we share the same atmosphere, we are also the victim of the global warming and the climate change. So is it our making? So if you go by the BBS report of 2021, which was reported by the Department of Parks and Services, they found out that our environment absorbs around 8 million tons of carbon dioxide, and we emit less than a million emission of the carbon dioxide. So we could see that we are net carbon negative, but still then we are facing the aftermath and the consequences of climate change. How are we doing in terms of prevention and mitigation? Yes, like I've said, we are carbon. In fact, we are carbon neutral. In fact, we are carbon negative, and we are often termed as the champion in environmental, conservation. So then as a citizen, what would be our question? Is as observant, what would be our question? Is then what could be some of the attributes that lead to this success story of Bhutan? And through my document analysis and preliminary findings, we can attribute that the success story of our mitigation and prevention of the climate change to these four broad themes. First one is visionary leadership. So visionary leadership, in a sense, Bhutan, the Bhutan's fight against the climate change is spearheaded by His Majesty's concern. And if you look at the Constitution of Bhutan, we would see that in article that I have in my introduction, I briefly talked about it. So in the Constitution of Bhutan, in Article 5, there's a clause which said that which states that we'll have to maintain 60% of our forest for all times to come. And even in the National Environmental Protection Act, it is the policies that Bhutan has is consistent towards conservation of forest and the environment. And another unique, which is often appreciated and talked in the Western media, is about the developmental philosophy of GNH, which is born from His Majesty the King, fourth King. So where our developmental activity is always screened through, the understanding whether the development is going to be, beneficial to all people, or whether it would create a large environmental impact. So GNHC, that is Gross National Happiness Commission, screens out our developmental activities, and thus that is also the one cornerstone of how our success story of preservation of nature has been made possible. And another would be the presence of the large natural preserve, which means we have 10 protected areas, then we have 9 biological corridors, amounting to about 52.32% of area by land coverage in our country is forest. and the preserved, natural preserve. And another one is community forest, where the restricted areas are given to the community to protect and to conserve and to manage and to use sustainably. And as per our report, it is said that we have around 688 community forests, which amounts to around 2% of the our land cover. Another one, the third cornerstone or the third attribute is nature inclusive culture. We Bhutanese have a religious belief that is saying that a certain mountain or area is an abode of deity, which means like there is a presence of deity in there, so therefore we should preserve it and we should not destroy it. So this kind of nature inclusive culture have lead to the preservation effort, has had positive impact on the preservation effort. And moreover, the culture like ladam means where the passing of the passage towards the mountain are closed. La here refers to mountains, dam meaning close. So for a certain period of time, a mountain is closed where people cannot travel along the mountain, thus preserving that particular mountain or for that sake particular area. And rhythm is also in our culture where people are not people are restricted to harness or harvest the forest resources for a certain period of time. And we also have the sokdam, that is also an practice where people are prevented to kill animal for a certain month or so. And again, the practice, a traditional practice like risups here refers to mountain protectors or a mountain guardian. People, they in the community, they assign a person who looks after the particular mountain or that particular area. And then nisups, this refers to in a community they would assign a person who will look after the forest fire, look out for the forest fire. And this is how the conservation efforts has been benefited by nature inclusive culture. Another one is environmental awareness. This environmental awareness is very high in Bhutan, and that is in fact that is been done through environmental education. We have in the mainstream, we have optional subject in class starting from class 9 to 12, and then even in the tertiary education like colleges, we have environmental education. So thus educating the people. And then we also have the media advocacy where we talk about the Water Act, Forest Act through radio, TV. And then one of the best example I could cite is the Guinness World Record. We are Guinness World Record holder in 2015 in cultivating a tree, cultivating a tree in an hour by 100 men. And I think the numbers are 74. I can't exactly remember the number, but I think like 74,000 or so. So we hold the Guinness World Record. This shows that the commitment of our country in preserving the natural resources. And we also observe Social Forestry Day, National Forestry Day, and 2nd June. So this is a day where we create awareness about the need to conserve the forest and our environment. So in this way, broadly, if we narrate all those stories and then look at all those factors, I think the success story of our country in being net carbon negative, which is due to the success of conservation of natural resources and the environment, can be attributed to these 4 broad factors. And then now, further analyzing it, if you further analyze, then the summary of our Bhutan's carbon negative story can be narrated by these three variables. If you look at here, population, hydropower, and forest. So we have manageable population, which is amounting to 7,71,000 or so, and hydropower, because our main energy demand has been highly most dominant energy provider of our country has been hydropower, which is renewable, and therefore it doesn't emit carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And another one is the forest. Like I mentioned before, we have huge coverage of forest, which is amounting to 72% or so of the land. So therefore, these three factors is responsible for maintaining our carbon neutrality and in fact, net carbon negative. So till now, it has been existed in harmony, which means in equilibrium. Now the challenge that it poses is that now what happens next against the time, as we go, as the time passes by, and as we face climate change, what would happen to this three important variable? Let's look at it. If you look at here in the population, if you could talk about the population, this is the data I got from the Worldometer. There we could see that in the graph, we could see that the population projection is going to be always increasing. If you look at the circle marked there, the year percentage change, we will see that it has been increasing, and we could see a net increase in every year. If you go by, look at the 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, so the population is increasing. Of course, it is increasing, and therefore, what we can predict is that the population is going to be, going to increase further. And one of the big concern again, if you look at, is the urban population. Yes, population increasing, but now what is happening in the urban population? Urban population percentage is also increasing. So which means then what happens is the energy demand would be more. So the energy demand, when the energy demand is more, then what happens is then the hydropower that we have, I think I'll touch on that a little bit later. There is a link between the energy demand and the increase in urban population. And if you look at one of the big concerns again is the Kaul case. If you look at the Kaul case, which is reported in 2016 by ISMO, they found out that Kaul is a geok in Nitasha. It found out that there is a 50% migration of rural to urban. So we could see that, as a population increases and as even urban population increases, then what will happen is the energy demand will increase. Then when the energy demand increases, the hydropower project, generation, or the hydropower, the energy which has been, supplied by the hydropower will not be sufficient enough. I think I'll touch a bit on that in the next factor. So again, the other factor is forest. Now, how will this forest change as the time passes by and as we face the climate change? Forest, if you look at the data here, we will see that it has been stable for now. But the question is, will it be stable for long? So therefore, there's always chances, and there's always the area of where we need to really talk about our conservation efforts and how to do it policy wise. Of course, we have a strong policy and a consistent policy, but then it is not sure that the forest percentage will remain on that at the same level. And the reason could be why reason could be because now if you look at the settlement, with the increase in the population, then what happens is if you look at the data, we can see that the increase in the settlement percentage. If you look at then the more of the forest might be used for the settlement, and then what happens is that the forest percentage will decrease. And not only that, if you look at the agriculture practice, then it has drastically decreased. And if you look at 2014 and 2010 data, then it is decreased, which means now lifestyle is changing. The people are no more, depending on the agriculture, whether they are migrating to urban, and then they involved in corporate and business, and thus what happens is the energy demand will also increase. And the third is hydropower plant. Like I've mentioned before, it's a dominant clean energy that suffice the most domestic energy needs of our country. If you look at the graph here, we see that the energy consumption has increased over the years, even in the domestic consumption. If you look at you see the red um, portion of the graph, there it is a consumption in the country. So it is also increasing, like I've mentioned before. And the, of course, export is also there. But then what we should be mindful is, if you look at the sources of the hydropower, then it is all the runoff river. The hydropower works on the runoff river, so which is climate dependent. With the climate change, what happens is the runoff river precipitation pattern will change, and the glacier lac retreat will be rate of retreat will be very high, and then what happens is then it would not be sustainable. So if you look if you look at the sources of our hydropower water that is being used in a hydropower plant, then it is mostly from the glacier and of course from the seasonal rainfall. So then these both the sources are climate dependent, and that poses a greater risk. If you look at the glacier, we have around 2,674 glaciers, of which 24 is considered as a threat. So if you recall on our history, in 1994, the Lukso, the glacier outburst lake happened, and then what happened is in the Pochu there was a flood and it caused a lot of damages. So therefore, with the climate change, these are some of the the impact that we would have. And even though, if you look again, if you look at the rainfall, we see that the rainfall pattern is different. And when in the lean season, then we are also importing the electricity from India, which might not be aware, which many of our public might not be aware, because we talk a lot about hydropower, and then we're exporting hydropower. It is one of the most GDP generator, we say that. But what we should all understand is that if you look at here, we see that in 2017, 4% of the domestic demand is imported from the India, the hydropower electricity. So therefore, these are some of the challenges. So now let me go to the challenges. So growing demand of energy, like I have, I talked and touched a bit earlier, increasing population, then changing lifestyle, and then, coming up of the Jimiling industrial estate in Sarpang would, demand more energy supply. So therefore, what happens is then over dependence to hydropower sector would seriously injure, because now as the climate changes, then again this is more insecurity is there. So now again, what we'll have to do is we'll have to now, what we need is we need to diversify the renewable energy source. Now, if you look at our present status, the most of the renewable energy which has been generated in our country is mostly in the pilot phases. If you look at the solar farm, Shinkar in Bumtang, Sipu and Gaselu in Wangdi, they are all in the pilot phase, and then they are in the state, they are not operationalized. In fact, the story of Shinkar, you might have been updated about it in a Queensel. It says that the people of Bumtang are not ready to give up their pasture land for the PV solar plant. And I think if I share my opinion or perspective on this, I think I can understand the sentiment of the people in the Bumtang, and particularly to those people whose land will be affected with the solar plant installation. But we'll have to look at the greater national interest of diversifying the renewable energy sources. Because if you resort to other, again, non-renewable energy sources, then that is going to emit carbon, and then that is going to seriously injure our carbon negative status. So I think for a greater good, it will be wiser enough for Bomtang's people to in fact offer the land for the solar plant installation. And then the Sifu and Gaselo in Wangdi is also that is just also in planning phase, and they have not installed yet. So in now another source of renewable energy is wind farm. The wind farm in Rubista, there is two wind windmill there where the energy is generated. But however, recently, if you look at the recent status, because of the motor blade issue, it is non-operational at the moment, and that questions us about technical capacity of our country. And even in the Winsel, then it was given that they're waiting for a Japanese technician to come here, and because of these COVID issues, the technician is not able to visit Bhutan, and all those sort of stories. This questions us, do we have the capacity? And I think we need to work more in developing the capacity, technical capacity as well. And with regard to transport and topography as well, in the sense, because our wind, the area where we have more wind is in the often in the hill and the cliff area. So therefore, there's a huge problem with the transporting the huge motor and blades and all those installation equipments. And I think we should also consider all those things. And biogas, another one renewable source could be biogas. So in terms of biogas, Bhutan has started the biogas project in 2011 and 2016, 2011 to 2016, and that is also in the project basis. And I think we need to really upscale our effort in really looking for the renewable energy resources. Then when it comes to the transportation, most of the energy demanded in our country is due to industry and transportation. So in the industry, I just talked about diversifying in the form of renewable resources. Now, when it comes to transportation, how can we do it? So again, in the pilot phase, electric cars were introduced. In 2018, 26 taxis were introduced. And because of the charging station issues and all those other issues, again, it is still in the pilot phase. And again, about the public transport. Now, can we not use fossil fuels, because fossil fuels emits carbon dioxide and all those greenhouse gases emission, which will seriously again affect our status of carbon neutrality. Then can we make the public transport run by renewable resources like renewable energy sources like electricity. The vehicle import in our country has increased by 5% as per the Council in 2021, despite the COVID-19. So this shows that these are also again a challenge for us, because vehicle emission is one of the dominant, I think, in our country, the dominant source of the emission of carbon. So way forward, I'll talk about a little bit about this way forward is limited to my understanding, only understanding of how we can diversify our energy sources. So as recommended by renewable energy resources assessment report, we need to diversify our energy source. So what could be the viable sources? The viable sources can be solar, like I've mentioned before, wind, and we can also work on with our transportation, making it more eco-friendly and limiting the emission of carbon. So in solar, a report says that the irradiation is better than the Germany and UK, which means that we have the capacity. Even Germany and UK, they have sizable power sources which is run by the solar. But we have better irradiation. So I think the potential is there. Even the within that report is mentioned that the Department of Renewable Energy under MOE estimated that theoretically solar potential is at the 6 terawatts. But in the council I have mentioned earlier, and the pipeline we have the installation of the Shinkar in Bontang solar plant that would amount to around 30. They're targeting 30 megawatts. Then 17 in Sifu in Wangdi, and 23 in Gaselo. So which will amount to only 70 megawatts. So you can see that such a gap between the potential and the real plan to achieve that as well. So I think we should explore more and upscale our solar installation project. And wind, another source could be wind. And if you look at the report of the same report, we will see that we could have close to 760 megawatt of wind energy can be harnessed. And this, they've also identified the areas. Wangdi, Chukai, and Dagana are some of the potential areas. So right now, like in Arubisa, I mentioned the two wind farm is generating around 600 kilowatt. Used to generate 600 kilowatts. So we could see again gap between this potential and the the actual energy being generated. 600 kilowatt, and we have potential of 760 megawatts. And when it comes to transportation, how can we ease? How can we limit carbon dioxide generation? Perhaps maybe electric bus. And even in National Assembly in 2019, they discussed about purchasing the electric bus. But I think there is still no progress. So I think we can also explore on this one. Whereas in Nepal, India, and China, all the countries, neighboring countries, they have this electric bus and it is in operation. So therefore, these are some of the way forward that can be suggested. These are references. And I would like to end my talk with a bit of reflection. If you look at the quotation from His Majesty, the King James Yuangchu, we see that throughout the centuries, the Bhutanese have treasured their natural environment and have looked upon it as a source of all life. So this traditional reverence for nature was delivered to us into the 20th century with our environment still richly intact. So we wish to continue living in harmony with nature and to pass on this rich heritage to our future generation. So this aspiration of His Majesty is reflected. If you look at the photo there, right now you can see the beautiful urbanization blend in with the beautiful nature there. But the question is, how long? How long can we go in this, follow this middle path of development, balancing between the development and environment? And on the face of global warming and climate change, we have a greater threat. So therefore, I think we should ask question. And my intention to talk on this presentation, on this occasion, is also to generate this talk. And I would like to end my presentation here, and looking forward to the remarks from the coordinator and the discussant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yonten. Yeah, thank you so much, Yonten, for that. For that range of thought-provoking issues on how culture or how ecology and economy, concerns relating to ecology and economy can be somehow dealt with in ways that are less harmful and recognizing of the interdependencies. So I will not these are issues that would benefit very much from our discussants' input. So Dr. Sonam Wanchu, who's the discussant for this panel, I would request. Yes. Please.
All right. Kuzuzangpo to all, and thank you very much. Thank you, Yonten, for your great presentation. I think you presented many excellent points that are interesting and relevant to the climate change and mitigation in Bhutan. I think climate is not something that we want to believe or deny anymore. It's a scientific fact now. I'm saying this because the latest IPCC report, which is now the 6th assessment report, made it very clear that the climate change is unequivocally caused by human activities. So those who do not know what is meant by IPCC, it stands for Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, where climate experts around the world gather together to produce reports about the knowledge on climate change. So in these IPCC reports, and also Yonten mentioned, there are many evidences or effects of climate change around the world, such as global temperature rise, sea level rise, melting and retreating of glaciers, glacial lake outburst flood, which is very much relevant to our home country. And there is also other effects, such as melting of ice sheet, permafrost, wildfires, so on and so forth. Therefore, in order to mitigate climate change, we, the people on Earth, must do something. And we are the only one who can do it, actually. So monumentally, we have done something, at least at a policy level. Because every year, leaders around the world meet once a year to talk about the climate change. This year, leaders will meet at Glasgow in Scotland, and this meeting is known as COP, which stands for Conference of the Party. So during COP21, which was held in Paris in 2015, almost all the countries signed the agreement known as Paris Climate Agreement, or Paris Accord. So in this agreement, for the first time, all the countries have agreed to limit the global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. That is to keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. And all the countries also agreed to pursue effort to limit the temperature rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius. So in this agreement, one of the commitments or the pledges that the leaders made was to cut the carbon emission in their country and bring down to net zero by 2050, by mid of the century. So this is exactly where the presentation of Yonten nicely fits in. So far, there are only 2 countries in the world that have met that promise, the net zero carbon emission promise. And they are, of course, our country, Bhutan, and a small country in North America called Suriname. And if you want to know why Bhutan has achieved a net zero carbon, I think Yonten has done it very well. You identified a couple of key areas that has led the path of our carbon neutrality, including the leadership, for example, our king, and strong environmental and developmental policies, and also the awareness, which are environmental friendly. You also touch on our unique culture and beliefs, I think. And additionally, you also mentioned about the size of our population. Our population is quite small, around 700,000. And you also mentioned about the large share of the renewable energy and land use and land cover change. And you also discuss about the foreseen challenges of staying Bhutan as a carbon neutral country, such as a growing energy demand, immaturity of renewable energy sources and sectors, and also the minimizing the number of vehicles that uses gasoline. And I think you also touch on ways to move forward as a country to remain as a carbon neutral. And the possible measures that you indicated are, I think, increase financing in renewable energy and encourage use of electric vehicles instead of gasolines. I think you have done your research very well, like in my remark, and I think you have covered a majority of very key interesting point. However, the couple of things that I would like to suggest for you to incorporate in your work is it would be easier for the audience if you could provide a context or a rationale of your work, like why you are doing this work, you know. But I'm sure like you have in your paper, or like you plan to do so. And second thing is a methodology also could be a better, like how you did your work. You could clearly state like how you conducted your research, the availability of the data and all. And you could also carefully look at the policy document and synthesize like how it fits within the climate mitigation activities and plans in Bhutan. And finally, I think there are many areas in your presentation where you could quantify result. I believe that I think you have your results are mostly taken from secondary sources. So I think if you could find a primary data and you know work on, I know it's difficult, but if you could work on a primary data, maybe it's robust and yeah, scientific. And yeah, I think it's a very well done research. And as a food for thought, I would like to stress that climate change does not respect geographic or political boundaries. So we have to act now or never. So yeah, thank you, and just tell you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manchu. And to return briefly for a moment to Yonten before you respond. So I think that, you know, as was clear also from the discussant's remarks, that you have highlighted an important planetary challenge. And perhaps, I mean, I haven't actually, you know, we don't yet know what exact form your paper will take when we and we hope to publish some version of it in the volume, and we hope that you will, you know, want to be a part of it. And I feel that, you know, some of the things that are in the context that was just referred to, I think the context, as I see it for your work, perhaps be made more explicit, is how Bhutan is, you know, is sort of swimming against the tide. And as a country that has over time made these choices in order to stay carbon neutral, in order to create carbon neutrality, it is actually facing the, you know, it's actually facing exacerbated challenges because it is pursuing the right paths and behaviors, as opposed to countries that have less of a challenge because they have made less commitments. And in this case, you know, Bhutan is definitely worth attending to, everyone, because Bhutan in a sense is actually doing a lot of other countries' job as well in terms of the environment. So it's facing greater challenges because it's done the right things. And you know, the carbon, we were just talking about the Paris Agreement. I mean, the interesting thing here is how in many other countries politics is constructed on the question of the environment. right? So whereas, so from a, from an academic, like from a researcher perspective, I would say this is something interesting to think about as you develop your work, that in Bhutan, politics is not really constructed in the same way around the question of preserving the environment, because there's a fundamental kind of at least fundamental level of understanding that we are interdependent and that economy is embedded in ecology. Within that, there may be minor, or even sometimes major differences on to what extent a resource can be utilized. But it's not the same as in many other, democracies, or even countries that are, far more industrialized, or I hesitate to use the word developed because that's a very subjective criterion. But if you think about the sort of skepticism and outright hostility that we see towards the Green Deal, say in the US, I mean, it's revelatory. It's stark that the amount of sort of visceral kind of antipathy that people have to issues of environment is in stark contrast with somewhere like Bhutan, where like politics across the board, there's no politics constructed on it. So when someone like Trump gets elected, he doesn't want America to be part of the Paris Climate Agreement, and so you actually so climate becomes hostage to who gets voted, and it becomes, and so you need a different administration to come in so that the country can actually think that climate change is real. So in a sense, there are, people often talk about countries elsewhere, and when I say elsewhere, I mean those from a Eurocentric point of view often say others are back in time or trapped in time. But if you think about many present day even Western, again, a word I'm using with inverted commas, in many such countries, they are the ones that are trapped back in time and still focusing on the debates in the 1990s about, is climate change real, when for many of the rest of us globally, we are not the ones, those people and those places and and those individuals and movements are not the ones trapped in time, because we know it is very much real, and that it's not a I remember, I mean, when I used to be a student back in the 90s, this used to be, there would be like these positions often closely affiliated with, some kind of petrochemicals lobby, where people would say, no, climate change isn't real, it's not happening. So we've moved beyond that in the last 20, 30 years, so far beyond that. And yet it's some of those countries, and especially, I mean, it's when I see and I'm bringing this in a point not related to what you were saying, but in the interests of our broader discussion, when I see the sort of anti-vaccine lobby having so much political purchase in places like the US, or anti-environment lobby, I'm thinking that is being trapped back in time. If you're not trusting the vaccines, if you're not trusting climate change, whereas thinking about these things with with foresight and that's the paradox, that actually if you have the foresight to think about it, you have the harder choices. Whereas if you don't, you're actually making the situation worse for everyone. I particularly really like the matrix that you had of the different reasons why. I thought that was a very good kind of visual demonstration of the sorts of factors from different domains that come together to make this work. So I mean, I think that and finally, I mean, the question of, many people say, how was carbon neutrality achieved? And there are publications where people say, how did Bhutan achieve carbon neutrality? And a smaller subset of the people go on to say, how can carbon neutrality be maintained? And see that as a question. Or those who do often get to the point of saying, okay, here are the challenges. And maybe you could push yourself to go further and say, well, okay, in dealing with the challenges, what are the efforts that have been made? How far along are we? And, just not, because we often stop at, well, we need to do this and these are the challenges, but then how are those challenges sought to be dealt with, and what can actually be done with them, either across the board in a more generic more general sense, or more specifically even with one individual subset of the factors. So, just transportation maybe, or something. So there's clearly potential for a lot of work. Again, I know, like the previous presenter, you're not doing this. You teach, but I think that this is the really interesting thing about academic work is not the preserve of just people who are tenured full-time in universities. Anyone, it's just the process of research, and that precisely is the idea of what we're trying to do here. So I'm really kind of really happy to have these perspectives and to see the work that you've done. So before going on to our next paper, I would just if you want to respond to something, Yonten, or just offer any remarks, and then we'll go to the next paper with Dichen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sonam and Doctor, for giving the feedbacks. I think in the heat of excitement, I have forgotten to talk about or to set the context of how my presentation came about. Actually, I had a paper where I analyzed the documents and then talked about what is the reality of climate change in global warming, and then later to align with the theme of the conference here. I worked on, and it is a working document actually it's a working document. I worked on looking at turning inward, and then looking at what are the things that we are doing actually, and how we are being able to maintain the carbon neutrality and all those. And then that's the reason why if you look at the comments from Dr. Sonam talked about trying to look at the methodology. The primary methodology that I used is just was just document analysis, looking at the policy document. Of course, I did look at the policy documents, act. We also have the climate change policy drafted 2020. And I also looked at all those things, but like he mentioned, like Doctor mentioned, I think it's always better if you look for primary data and then really go into field and then see and then collect the data. And but as Doctor mentioned, as a teacher, we don't have such luxury of time. But then still, then what I wanted was to engage in the discussion of this huge, challenge that we're facing in the 21st century. And I am immensely, thankful for the conference, thankful to conference organizer for, giving opportunity to talk about, something, topic which should be, taught a lot about, and we should talk until and unless, our future is secured. So this dialogue should keep on going. So that's why I wanted to, even though my work is not completed, it is a working document, I wanted to talk about and, create an awareness. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yonten. Every conversation matters, and today we've kind of traversed a whole range of domains, as those of you who have been here would have realized. This is, I realize, also in some senses turning into an author's workshop, because I feel that with every next presentation, I feel more confident that we have a good set of papers, academic, that can be part of an academic volume. And so, the conference has kind of taken a life of its own. It's gone from being an early career researchers conference to a very intense authors workshop sort of forum where we're having these discussions that certainly are great. So I would now like to call upon Dichen Rabgil to present his paper for which Dichen will be presenting, but there are other co-authors as well. And then we'll get to discussing it. Dichen, could you please begin your presentation? Thank you.